Hello everyone. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. It's a pity I couldn't manage to be there in person, but I hope next time I will be there with you. And I hope you enjoy your nice Spanish weather, not too hot, I hope. So what I plan to talk about today is about allergies and other environmental diseases. And I would like to be a bit provocative and discuss not anymore from the climate change perspective, not even from the One Health, but talk about the multi-exposure that humans actually are facing lately. So first of all, I'm DAMIALIS. I'm an assistant professor of terrestrial ecology and climate change in Thessaloniki Aristotle University.
Excuse me, can you just speak up a little bit because
the
room is huge and...
Okay, perfect. So I would like to start with some hard facts. So if we want to talk about past, present, and future regarding diseases worldwide, and according to IPCC, we know there is a rise in non-communicable diseases. And practically, we talk about numbers like 3.7 million deaths per year. I repeat the number, 3.7 million deaths per year. This is just from non-communicable diseases. I mention this because, of course, allergies is one of them. And that's why we know that allergy is called nowadays as environmental disease, or as they called it a bit unluckily as the pandemic of the century, a bit before the pandemic, of course. So let's start. So with allergy, we know that allergy is called an environmental disease, and I would like to make a short overview about the past, present, and maybe the future in a while. So we know for many different reasons, and not all of them are necessarily clarified. So we know that we have more incidence of either stronger or more frequent allergic symptoms. There are many papers, I will not get into detail. We know we have more allergy, either asthma or rhinitis, and we assume one of the reasons is the change of lifestyle and also the environment that becomes worse. And since we live in it, so we have more allergic symptoms. But there are also many other reasons that somebody could think of and that could be responsible for having more diseases, environmental diseases. And now let's talk about allergy. For example, we have more migration. It was a huge wave of financial migration about 10 years ago, still continues, not as strong. We have climate migration, we have wars, and this means many different things. Could mean that I changed my lifestyle since I moved to another country, could mean that I'm exposed to new things, I'm exposed to different things. I have different medical services, better or worse. I have a different diet, different stress, could be a combination of many, many different things. So somebody could say, okay, what should I do to avoid environmental diseases? So for example, in Greece, we measure in many different sites and we have lots of years of sampling. Why do I care about Greece, apart from that I'm Greek? So practically it could be, and sounds a bit the first line of provocation, let's say, it could be that what we have known so far, maybe it's not exactly accurate. And even if it was some time ago, data are changing. And then what we knew it was true until yesterday, maybe it's not anymore. So Greece actually was the second country after Switzerland that about 2 decades ago, they showed huge increasing trends in the abundance of pollen. So to have allergy, usually I care about aeroallergens. We usually talk about aerosols, so fungus spores and pollen. Of course, can be many other triggers of allergic diseases, but we will focus on aerosols. And Greece showed already by that time, that was about 20 years ago, that actually the majority of different pollen types were increasing, and not just increasing, but actually were increasing hyper exponentially. We talk about differences of 2-fold up to 5-fold increases 20 years ago. I don't dare to even show you what happens today. And that's not something that we only found, of course, in Switzerland and Greece. So until today, there have been many multi-center studies and also major journals like Lancet Planetary Health that have shown that across the world, actually, we have similar cases. We have more intense seasons, earlier seasons, peakier seasons, could be also longer, but not necessarily. And this could mean also more severe symptoms. But it's not just, of course, the abundance. It's also about how early the season starts, because that means earlier symptoms. What about also if we discuss about synergies, since we talk about co-exposure and multi-exposure and One Health, we see more and more that things are not as simple as they used to be in the past. So we don't just have, let's say, more temperature, more pollen. It's not as simple as that, unfortunately. So we see that actually there is a variety of reasons, for example, for the flowering of plants and also for the pollen produced and also for the pollen inhaled, which is not anymore just temperature, it's urbanization, it's island heat effect, as previous speaker said, it's higher NO2, and the combination of these things actually is the one that triggers really a lot to have more severe exposure, of course, and therefore higher disease occurrence. And very important, this was seen in many different sites, including also Germany and in a more rural place, also in Greece, in, of course, more polluted place and so on. Exactly the same things. If we talk about also new allergens, since we talk about allergies, we know the case of ambrosia, all of us have heard of it. We know that was expanding, is expanding, has been expanding. I know for sure, even though this map, that's an older map, this map doesn't have Greece having ambrosia. We know that actually half of Greece to the north is full of ambrosia from the west to the east and up to, not yet in Athens, but in my place, Thessaloniki, which is the small red dot here, is actually already has ambrosia. Not a lot yet, but it's something like double to triple to what we didn't have some decades ago. And we know that this, of course, could cause new allergies or more extreme allergies, since we talk about co-exposure with fungi in this case regarding seasonality. And so if somebody asks, okay, we understand that allergies are environmental diseases that have to do with climate change, with increased temperature, more pollen, and so on. But what does One Health have to do with that? So what we know so far and how we do research, at least in my field, is that actually we say, okay, we try to see how many different factors actually affect human. And we try to, not all of us, but let's say in our best ability, we try and say, okay, let's check radiation, weather extremes, maybe also air pollution, some pathogens, and the combination of as many factors as possible. And that's what we do, and that's perfect, right? Actually not. That's the anthropocentric point of view, and that's exactly the problem of what we have been doing in research during the last decades. Practically human, and let's call it here personalized medicine in this nice, beautiful tree, should be just an equal branch to everything else. And this has to be done like that, because if I look at it from the perspective of a medical doctor, well, I'm not, then, of course, the sender is, of course, human, but actually that's exactly the problem of climate change in the first place. So what we need to understand is we have a changing world, and this practically means changing data. So if I want to be up to date, I have to see things in a One Health approach and more holistically. So take into account urban greenery, take into account ecosystemic services under the umbrella of climate change, environmental health, human, of course, but I have to take into account all data equally. And that brings us to the multi-exposure, because what we thought until yesterday that, there are some major factors that affect, let's say, some environmental diseases like allergies, it could be that they are not exactly accurate. And I give an example. So some years ago, we did actually want to check whether the pollen we catch with traditional devices, they are actually coming, as we thought, mostly near the sources, which is the biggest belief and also kind of simplification. But our assumption was that actually, indeed, if we fly with an airplane, no matter how high, the higher we get, the less pollen and fungal spores we get, which was exactly the opposite, to our surprise, to our happy surprise. We found actually that not only this was not some isolated incidents, but actually we saw that the majority of cases equals frequency, but also of abundance was higher and near the boundary layer, which of course, if somebody's an atmospheric physicist, they know very well it makes sense. So we saw that when we were about 2 kilometers and more, we saw that we had the greatest abundance, the highest abundance. And we were even happier as scientists, unhappy as I'm an allergic person, so I was not happy about that. When New York Times, a few years after, actually they posted in the front page, if I'm not wrong, this nice yellow cloud, which was full of pollen. And they said that it was an awful pollen season that year. And actually they can see it by having yellow clouds, which is great. This immediately poses some questions on what we thought we knew, like, so all these extreme events, we call it thunderstorms or higher wind speeds or extreme temperatures or co-exposure of things also vertically and transfer not necessarily from plants in the city, but could be from another country even. Did we take them into account? Do we really know the real exposure that I'm exposed to as an allergic person? And the question is probably not. And since I mentioned it, if I go to another nice example, which unfortunately was popular after the unfortunate incident of Melbourne in 2016, where 10 people died actually, and 3.4 thousand were hospitalized or sought emergency and medical attention. We know also that thunderstorm is related to allergic symptoms and allergic incidents, and there have been many studies since then about this. What we know is that when we have more lightnings or any other expressions of thunderstorms, we have more pollen. Usually we talk about pollen and usually about grass pollen, then we have more asthma cases. Since this is unpublished data, I don't show more on that, but what we know today, and that's why in my title you can see non-allergic symptoms as well, is that actually we had two cases, two categories. We had a category like that, which is the most frequent, and that's what the scientific world and the asthmatic world believes, that we have more lightnings during thunderstorm, more pollen, and more asthma cases. But actually we saw another category which was not small at all, that they had also more lightnings, more pollen, more pollutants. They were not allergics, pollen allergics, and they had asthma, which shows that actually it's not as simple as I have more pollen, I have during thunderstorm, and I have also asthma. I could be a non-allergic, which means that it's relevant to the general population, and then I could still have symptoms even though I'm not pollen allergic, which is very, very interesting, still not published. And this is, of course, very interesting, just a very quick note, because we know, according to IPCC again, that we expect, and we see it every day, at least in some climates, including Greece, that maybe some have drought, so maybe it's not that relevant, seemingly, of having more precipitation or more thunderstorms, but actually the point is that we have them in a shorter interval. That's why we have either floods in some cases, or we have more frequent thunderstorms, which at least for my previous work town, so in Germany, but also in Thessaloniki, as you see the black dot here in North Greece, it's actually relevant according to the forecast, if hopefully they don't become correct, actually. And since I talked a lot about allergies, I would like to a bit speed up because I don't want to spoil your break. So, of course, allergies is only one of the diseases. There are many other diseases. Also, we talked about non-allergic asthma, but you probably have heard also about not just the COVID example, the SARS-CoV-19, but also many other viruses. We know nowadays that allergy, as I said, is an environmental disease, and we know that half the population is expected to actually have some kind of allergy. But we do know also, according to the IPCC, but also major publications in Nature, Climate Change, and others, that it's a big emerging health risk, all the microbial burden. And if somebody calculates based on the reasons, if you see in this graph to the left column, let's say, if you see the reasons that could be responsible for exacerbations of some microorganisms, but not only microorganisms, and also how is the transmission, but also which of them are the most important, you see actually that the plants and the pollen, if you can see my cursor, it's just a tiny fraction. So imagine it causes so much problem and still it's a tiny fraction. And we know anyway regarding biodiversity that actually we probably have no idea which and how many viruses and bacteria we have anyway. Plus, I will include fungi. So we didn't even touch the problem, and we actually felt it through the COVID-19. So practically what we have here, and I will say again a small example quickly about the interaction, co-exposure or multi-exposure of viruses and many other also weather factors, and how this is affecting the COVID-19. It's not something new, even though it sounded very extravagant and great in a bad way during that time. So we knew anyway, because of climate change, that pollen seasons come earlier. So practically they nowadays coincide with the virus season. Also, this means practically that instead of being exposed to one thing, which is a virus during winter, now I'm exposed also to pollen and many other things. And it's not a new story because we know anyway from South Korea, we know from Germany, we know from Italy, from different viruses also, that when I have a co-exposure of things, could be some virus or some allergen before my exposure potentially to a virus, then I have a high exacerbation or an easier infection by the virus. I will not get into details, that's not the role of me and the Congress, but practically we know the mechanism. To put it very simply, normally our body produces some proteins that are called interferons, and normally these proteins are defending our organism against viruses and many other, of course, microbes. But if I'm exposed before that to allergens, here pollen, but any allergen practically, we haven't even seen it for house dust mites, then my chances to get an infection are higher. And that was a big study with different countries, and we had proven the mechanism. And of course, when the COVID came, we were very interested because that happened very close to the COVID, to the pandemic, a few months actually before. And then immediately we started the study, which was a huge study across the world with 31 countries, 248 monitoring stations, lots of cohorts, very strict epidemiological study. And practically what we showed, it's that it's not just that, you know, if I have a contact with humans, that's enough. Actually, there is a variety of factors also proven by CERN that it's a combination of biological factors, which is among others pollen. It's a combination of air pollutants, and it's a combination, of course, of weather factors together with exposure, either if it's lockdown, population density, or contact of some kind. And that could be explained to a very high percentage, depending, of course, on the country. And because I cannot possibly exhaust all the different environmental diseases, the point is that we have already mentioned some allergic diseases and non-allergic diseases, infectious diseases, but of course, I don't know if some of you have migraines. Unfortunately, I also have migraines, apart from allergies. They also have connected, also even depression with weather, but also other expressions, so other environmental factors. And we know that also neurological diseases are connected with that. And it seems that either it was that we didn't notice, which I highly doubt, or that we start having exacerbations of diseases that maybe they were minor and not frequent, but suddenly we have more of them. And the take-home message, therefore, is that because we actually are facing a challenge, and the challenge is that actually we are getting the planet sick, but also the planet, of course, it's not personal thing, it seems that we and our children are and will be getting sick. And nowadays, the good news is that the scientific community is more ready, more mature in terms of being more aware, but also because we have the technology, regardless if it's AI or just more data or more collaborations. But in the end, we have to fight against time because we're late already, and we have to actually collaborate, unite forces, and try our best to resolve this issue. And having said this, I would like, since also the title of the session or congress is about communicating by meteorology and also the impact to public health. So I would like to say that we have, as previous speakers actually said already, that we have to stop thinking just in terms of science and then make a step forward and go to policy, and even step forward and go to politics. So trying that, last year we tried some colleagues, and we went to the European Parliament and we said, okay, we measure air quality, we measure air pollution, why not bioresources? And of course, nobody cares about bioresources because they say, you know, you cannot do anything because they come from plants. What should they do? Cut the plants? Fair enough. But in early 2000s, some Europarliamentarian said that why should we care about climate change and if the polar bear gets extinct? And since then, that's actually sounds even like a hoax, which is not, unfortunately. And what we try to do is that we have to find ways, because that affects allergies, that affects some of the environmental diseases I mentioned already, including viral infections. We should try harder to put the word together, all of us, and try to say for different environmental diseases and for agents that causes diseases, that they have to be included in air quality planning, in urban planning, and any other way we can affect, of course, if we can affect the politicians. And with that, I would like to finish. And of course, I would like to thank many authors that, of course, participated in all these studies I showed. And thank you all very much again once more for the invitation.